Okay, so those were the secular methods, and what about the religious method?
The religious is very straightforward in a way. It is a horizontal cut with a razor-sharp knife across the neck, properly stretched, and that's something we're still working on. What is the proper stretching with a razor-sharp knife? And that, in the kosher side, is extremely carefully monitored. So the kosher religious slaughterman is called a shochet, and the shochet is trained, and a large part of his training is in sharpening a knife so that it is razor sharp, using a whetstone and really, really good steel knives, quite expensive, custom made to meet other religious specifications. One of which is that that knife has to be twice the width of the neck. And work by Dr. Grandin has shown that that is extremely important. It is a completely straight knife, and it has quite a bit of length. And that is important, and is one of the issues that a lot of the research doesn't take into account. When people use knives, they don't always use those kind of knives. The other thing that a shochet does is after every kill for large animals, with chickens, they'll sometimes do a few animals, and if there's a problem, all the animals will be considered unacceptable. Before and after that, either each animal or the group, the shochet will take his knife and run it across his fingernails. And what that allows you to do is find any nicks in a knife, so that if the knife is not perfect. And that's extremely important, because when you're cutting, when you cut with a razor, you often don't know it. We know anecdotally from humans that when they cut with a razor, you don't even realize you've cut yourself. And you have cuts, and most of us get paper cuts and other kinds of cuts. We only realize we've cut ourselves when we see the blood.
Right, yeah, you're shaving and suddenly, whoa, how'd that happen?
Yeah, but these are razor-sharp knives. And so that nick is extremely important, because now you're getting a pull or a tear. And so they are extremely carefully trained. The Muslims do the same kill. The Quran requires a sharp knife, but they have never put together the kind of what is almost a practical best practices manual, which the Talmud, the second text in Judaism, actually starts off and is actually in part a manual on how to do it. And so they will use a sharp knife, but they don't specify it. And they don't test it for nicks every time. And they probably are not sharpening it quite as sharp. And so one of the things, again, our program is now working heavily, is with the Muslim community to develop training materials and video and other kinds of material to help the Muslim community emulate what is being done already in kosher. So in fact, I have a knife that's specifically designed for the Muslim community. One of the places where we don't have any constrictions because there are no rules is the ergometrics of the knife. The kosher halaf traditionally has been really square-handled, so it has four corners, which is fine if you're cutting one or two animals, as you did historically. But if you're cutting in a meat plant a number of animals, it gets very uncomfortable. And so we have not switched the rabbis to ergometric knives. So, and there's an extra safety feature on the halal knife to keep your thumb from getting into trouble. So we're learning from both communities and working together. And one of the really amazing breakthroughs that we're just beginning to figure out how to use is there is a company in New Zealand has developed a machine for testing knife sharpness. And so for the first time, we can quantitate our knives. And in fact, if you look at the data they give you as an example of a sharp knife, curved knife where the edges aren't as sharp. So they're learning that humans don't sharpen knives properly necessarily. And that's part of where they're selling it to the industry for routine to avoid carpal tunnel issues. But it has sharp very sharp and extremely sharp, and the knife they show as sharp is just that. And it is my postulate, because we need to do the work, that the kosher knife is very sharp, or even hopefully extremely sharp. And again, in many cases, the research literature at best has used a Muslim knife of unknown description and shape. In one case, the papers that are being used in Europe as proof positive, the knife was machine sharpened, and it was a 10-inch knife for sheep, which need to be at least 12 to 14 inches. So we have this situation where the research shows what happens with unstunned slaughter, but doesn't in fact reflect kosher or halal slaughter. And even if in those cases where a halal slaughterman has been used, it does not reflect kosher, although it's then written up and used as if it covered both of those.